Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Monday, June 4th, Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. Could we have a roll call, please?
Bruce Pauley.
Here.
Chad Kiger.
Here.
Ron Edwards.
Here.
Gordon Perry.
Here.
Lori Gross. Here.
We have everybody here tonight. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes for last month? Any questions or comments on them? I would like a motion to approve them.
I entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes have been approved. We had 3 items on the agenda for tonight. One has been postponed until next Tuesday night because of a legal something. But our first item tonight is docket number 18-23, which is REMAC LLC requesting a use variance approval for the use of farm equipment sales and service to be located at 2000 Indianapolis Avenue. The property is zoned PBO, Planned Business Office, and is in the Thoroughfare Overlay District. The site is actually the old Boone County where they stored their stone out there. Ben, would you like to take over? Oh, by the way, this is an open meeting, open to the public, so anybody wishing to speak will get their chance here in a little bit. The only request is that you sign in over here and we'll be good to go.
Good evening, board members. I may start real quick touching on the legal something on the first item on the agenda, which is docket number 18-22 for Herman and Kittle Properties. We were notified of an error in our legal notice. We had one of the property addresses incorrect, and the gentleman who owned the property that we had listed in there called us and said, "That's my property." So we needed to renotice with the proper addresses, so that's what we'll be taking care of at the special meeting next Tuesday, June 12th. Okay, so on to the items for this evening. First is docket number 18-23, which is the use variance approval. And RMAC LLC is also known as Reynolds Farm Equipment, which is already in the community, so you're familiar with the entity. I will get into the specifics of the use variance here in a second, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a background, they have worked out a deal with the county to do a land swap. They had owned property on the east side of the road and worked out with the county to do a land swap, and they got the county's property on the west side of the road in exchange. They are planning to build a Reynolds Farm Equipment facility. You see represented here in the rendering. And I will let them go through the details of exactly how they intend to use the property, but it's very similar to what you see a little bit further north on Indianapolis Avenue. And in terms of the actual site itself, they will be developing it out. This is the landscape plan, but you kind of see here represented. Obviously, Indianapolis Avenue is on the east. The interstate's kind of to the southwest. And then the road between them and Bain-Welker, one of their competitors, is directly to their north. And actually, the item listed is a little bit incorrect. They are in PBO zoning district. They are in the Thoroughfare Overlay District. They're also in the Interstate Overlay District. We couldn't have added any more regulation to this property if we tried. They're pretty much in every district we could have added. So that represents many of the challenges they had in determining how to design this site. They were dealing with significant buffers on about every property line that we had to work with. So we've come to an agreement and compromises on how to address many of those buffer yards, varying both the widths and the plantings that they've suggested. But in terms of the use variance, we're looking at the specific use. This is in the Planned Business Office zoning district, as is their neighbors to North Bain-Welker. If you recall, they were here last fall doing an expansion. We brought them through for a use variance for the same exact request you see here. What they're proposing is consistent with other uses in this corridor. And so perhaps it makes more sense for the city to look and see whether the Planned Business Office zoning district is appropriate for this area. And as we go through the comprehensive plan this year, that may be something we take a look at. In the meantime, for uses like this that are proposing on this corridor, we need to bring them through the use variance process. So that's what we're doing tonight. Walking through some of the elements of the staff report. As we mentioned, the Planned Business Office district does not permit farm equipment sales and service. thus the use variance request. They're planning to construct a new approximately 21,000 square foot sales and service facility with outdoor display area. In addition, they do have towards the western end of the property a separate storage building you see represented by this footprint here, and they can walk into some of the details about how they plan to use the property. In terms of the site itself, in this darker gray colors represented the customer and employee parking area, which is a paved area. Similar to Bain Welker, they would intend to have a equipment storage area to the back that is gravel, which is pretty consistent with what you see for like uses. The front of the building is for product display, customer entrance. The back is oriented towards service. So you see this western half of the building is essentially lined with overhead doors around its perimeter. And you can kind of see that represented in the elevations you have here. As you can see, this would be the southern part of the building here, if I remember correctly. Yep, south elevation. This is the north elevation, again, the overhead doors. And where's my west elevation? West elevation, you see here represented with a large overhead door for larger equipment. As you can see, their building is a mix of split-face block and metal panels, and they'll talk a little bit about that as well. But in terms of the use, we'll walk through the findings of fact on that. They are, for the record, located within the staff report. The first criteria is approval not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Staff has determined the variance used to permit the construction of a farm equipment sales and service operation will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. The proposed construction project will have no adverse impacts on the surrounding neighbors and or the community. Criteria number 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be substantially affected. It will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. The requested use variance will not affect the use and value of the area adjacent, including the variance in a substantially adverse manner. The proposed use of the property is similar in nature to that of several properties in the immediate vicinity, and where adjacent to similar uses, the applicant has proposed significant buffers to lessen any potential impacts. Criteria number 3, the need for the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property. The property is currently zoned for commercial office uses, but this area along Indianapolis Avenue has historically contained a mix of commercial and industrial land uses, including several similar agriculture or other equipment sales and service operations. The market for a typical office user permitted by the zoning district will be a challenge due to adjacent uses. Criteria number 4, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will constitute unnecessary hardship if applied to the property. Excuse me. The planned business office zoning district does not permit the development pattern that currently exists on this property or on immediately adjacent properties. The applicant would not be able to use this property for their proposed use if required to meet the terms of the UDO. And number 5, the approval does not interfere substantially with the City of Lebanon comprehensive plan. In fact, the comprehensive plan designates this property for mixed-use commercial industrial, and the proposed land use will be permitted with an industrial zoning classification. So while the zoning would require office, the comprehensive plan suggests a mix more towards commercial and industrial, which is what they're asking to do. So this request would not interfere substantially with the comprehensive plan. Staff recommendation. Staff recommends approval of the variance of use request to permit the construction of farm equipment sales and service use within the planned business office zoning classification, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the applicant respond appropriately to any and all requests made by the Technical Advisory Committee prior to the issuance of any building permit. And number 2, that the approval of the variance of use is limited to those farm equipment sales and service uses proposed by the applicant. Any change in use or increase in the intensity of the use by the current or any subsequent owners will require approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals. And that's just to keep track of the intensity of use. If any of that changes, that gives us an opportunity to review that with, it's not permitted by right, so that any sort of change in the operation would come back to you. So with that, excuse me. With that, if there are any questions about the use variance, I'd be happy to answer any of those.
Ben, can you elaborate on increased intensity? I don't understand.
So if they would significantly add to the building or change the type of equipment that they'd be selling, making that more substantial, that's really what would be. And now they're already building out the site, so there's not much more that they could do. But if somebody came in and maybe suggested a different but similar type of use, we'd want to be able to review that as well. So if Reynolds went out of business or something like that, or chose to move to a different location, somebody else bought it, we want the opportunity to be able to review if there's any even minor changes in use to make sure it's still appropriate for that site.
But intensity would cover currently rentals and a future land property owner there.
Correct.
So intensity, for simpler definition for myself, intensity would be increasing building size?
That would be one component of it, yes. So if they were to add significantly to the building, if it's determined by staff that that's something that increases the intensity of the use, then we'd want to bring that back to the board. There is some subjectivity in that for interpretation of staff. But if it's something that we deem a change in the intensity or an increase in the intensity, we'd want to bring it back to this board for review.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know roughly what % of the area is covered by building in relationship to the possible, how much they could increase the building?
So in terms of the impervious surface, I know that they're right at the max permitted by the zoning district. That would also include any paved and gravel areas. In terms of the building, they could add to the building and still meet the requirements of the zoning district. So they're significantly under that requirement. They could still add quite a bit, theoretically.
With all the different setbacks that you mentioned at the beginning?
Yeah, for the building setbacks there, they have plenty of room to add building. That wouldn't impact any of the buffer yards that they're requesting.
Other questions? Thank you, sir. Would somebody from Reynolds Farm Equipment care to step forward and tell us a little bit about it, or you can wait, you can come forward next time and tell us about it again, but I'll give you the opportunity to speak.
However you would prefer. I'm Max Mauser with Studio A. I'm representing Reynolds Farm Equipment. With me tonight's Mitch Fraser with Reynolds Farm Equipment. To give you a little bit on how the facility will operate, Ben did a nice job presenting it, but to add a little to it, the front of the store has a 15-foot covered area. And what they use that for is a display for lawn equipment or gators. This store is primarily set up for that, as the existing store is on Indianapolis Avenue, which I'm hoping you all are very familiar with. They've outgrown that space and have looked to find a place, and has been originally had mentioned was they were across the street and owned the property just south of the highway garage, and the county approached them about switching properties due to them wanting to keep the fairground kind of intact with all of their other properties. And it made sense to move to this piece. It gave a little bit more of a visibility from the interstate as Whitestown, Lebanon both are growing, and this is the area where people travel back and forth. They're looking at market for that small lawn equipment, small tractor equipment, gators, things like that, more so than the large farm equipment, even though that will be, just like always, part of John Deere's sales. But that's really the underlying how that would operate and what they're looking for. And in front of the parking, can I switch this to the site plan, Ben? Do you care? Just to give them a quick. Oops. The covered, as I talked about, it's right on the front of the building with, there's a concrete area. All that's covered, and the lawn equipment or gators would all be under it. The way the building's set up, the equipment would be delivered through the main entrance. It goes to the back. All those are service bays in the back. It gives the ability for them to pull in, pull through, exit, and leave. Each dock's on that configuration. It's hard for me to, without pointing, and I don't know how best to do this. They pull through after maintenance and can leave. The equipment in the back would be primarily the larger equipment or miscellaneous very small amounts of used equipment. They don't get a lot of that anymore. And it would probably, most likely, if it's larger used equipment, would be shipped off to a different store. There's a cleaning room in the back for equipment that comes in. There's an overhead door. It's all enclosed. And then as the larger equipment would come around the end of the building by 65 and pull up, they back into a loading dock area, which is on the north side of the building. It's all covered and screened. So no visibility other than a very narrow view if you looked up that loading dock from 65 somehow, if you had that ability to turn your head. All those parts, things are stored inside, so parts, sales staff, and a display room area will be inside this primary building. The exterior building in the back is for storing, primarily it would be the lawn, gators, things like that, that they have additional than out in front. It would be stored in there as well. So it's all enclosed. So the bulk of the display items are in front of the store. And then there's a small display area outside. If you look at the parking lot in the front of the building, there's the parking, which is perpendicular to the building. Then there's a drive lane, and you'll see a line, faint line that runs through that parking area. Everything between that line and the landscaping, that curb, is a display area as well. Similar to what they've got out front at their other store, it would be lined with the small tractors, small lawn equipment, some gators possibly. And that's all the hard surface, the pavement. So it's set up for them to be on that, for people to come in, be able to walk out, feel it, touch it, do all the things before they want to buy it. As far as utilities and things, they're all provided. We're working with the city to get a lift station that you guys are working on and sewer to the site as part of the project. So that's in the works. Water's available, power, everything's right there. We are doing a full, as far as the building, facade itself, full split face block wrap for the first floor, if you want to call it that, the 10 feet up. And then the metal the rest of the way, and it'll be a standing seam roof, metal roof. The colors are very similar to what you've got in the packet, I believe, that Ben supplied via light brown, tan colors currently. And then the outbuilding has a 3-foot split face wrap with metal above it. So we're doing what we consider a very nice building, very aesthetically pleasing. They have another store that's very similar to this in Atlanta, if you're ever over there. The front of it's very much the same. It doesn't have quite the overhang. This one only has 15 feet for one row of equipment under it versus that store's a little deeper and has a row for 2. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about the building or anything else at this point. Or I can come back for the second portion.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, this part is for they're requesting a use variance. It is a public meeting. Anybody from the audience care to step forward and voice their approval or disapproval or whatever? Not seeing anybody step forward, we'll close the public end of the meeting. Any questions for Ben?
I have one for you, Ben. The existing land, I mean, it's been used for lots of things other than space. How's the landscape plan actually going to work in geotechnical work been done to figure out how we're going to get down to something that plantings and landscape are going to be able to survive in?
Yeah, maybe Max can answer that question a little bit better, but they will have to dig out gravel in order to find dirt, clearly.
I'd be happy to answer that. As part of this project, and there's a master drainage plan that's going into place across the street on the fairgrounds property, which actually part of it's on the fairground, part of it's on what used to be Reynolds' old site. So the small dry basin, if you're familiar with the fairgrounds, that's kind of at the northeast corner of the church that's there and that entrance, that's going to get expanded to probably 5 times that size, and it gets dug out. Part of that contract is part of this project. It's a conjunction project with the store. So there's been an agreement between the county and Reynolds to build that and supply the outfall. That dirt that's there is available for us to use as well. So Ben, and you are correct, it's 4 feet of stone on that site, primarily based on the geotech report. A little less in spots, 3.5 feet maybe. So yes, around the perimeter, that 20 feet plus that we're going to be putting planting, stone will have to all be dug out, either hauled out or we'll reuse it on the site, but we'll use the dirt from across the street as we're doing this project to bring it in and fill in those areas to bring them to grade.
And that all gets, in the city review, that all gets balanced out to make sure that we're not going to change the drainage patterns in that area. We get a balance out of that, right?
Yeah, this will have to, as part of their development plan approval from the Plan Commission, go through drainage review, which they're currently in process of doing. So yeah, we will review all of that to make sure there's no changes no adverse impacts on surrounding properties. But as Max suggested, that the detention is going to be provided across the road for this site. But yes, that'll all be reviewed and approved as part of that process for Plan Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Being there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion for the use variance approval.
I would make a motion to approve docket 18-23 as written.
Second. Okay. Have a first and a second.
Gordon Perry.
And that motion takes into account the 2 recommendations by staff, correct?
Correct.
Aye.
Bruce Pauly.
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger.
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Congratulations. Passed. Now, we'll take up, I guess you can call it the other half of it, which is docket 18-24. They're requesting 9 development standard variances to construct the farm sales and service business to be located at 2000 Indianapolis Avenue. The property is zoned PBO and is in the thoroughfare overlay district. The variances are, I'm not going to read all the numbers. The first one's for the metal building construction. Number 2 will be lot plantings. Number 3 will be a building orientation. Number 4 will be parking paved surface. Number 5 will be parking area curbing. Number 6 is ground signage, which is the height of the sign. Next will be a corridor buffer. Number 8 is street trees. And number 9 is the interstate corridor buffer. Ben, would you take over?
All right. Well, we'll get into the meat of this now. We got through the use part. Now we'll get into some of the specific development standards. As I mentioned previously, this is both in the PBO district, the thoroughfare overlay district, and the interstate overlay district. So there is a number of standards that apply to this site, many of which are very challenging for this type of use to consider. And so we worked with the applicant to come up with suitable compromises that will both meet the intent of many of these standards, but still providing them the ability to develop this site efficiently and effectively. And I think we're able to do that. I will walk through each one of these and just explain the request. As I mentioned previously, all of the findings of fact are in the staff report for the record, so I will not go through all of those, or we'll be here for the next 45 minutes listening to me read. But I will go through each one of these individually. As previously mentioned, variance request number 1 is metal building construction. Within the thoroughfare overlay district, buildings constructed of metal are not permitted. It's pretty straightforward. What they had proposed is what both Max and I described for you, is the first floor, if you will, would be all split face concrete block. The remainder of the facades on all 4 sides would be steel metal panels, or steel siding panels, and that's what you see represented here. You can see this is the front elevation with the overhang, which you see represented across the front, and then as you get above that 10 feet, then it transitions to the steel metal panels. And the same holds true for all of the other elevations. You'll see that repeated, and some of this is what we had worked with them to add. Across the back, you can see that same split face block had been added. This was something we negotiated and had added with the applicant after working through them to try to dress up that rear of the building that faces the interstate. So that's variance request number 1. Number 2 is lot plantings. Again, in the thoroughfare overlay district, it requires the building base, at least 75% of the perimeter would contain landscape plantings. That's a particularly challenging requirement to meet for this type of use that has overhead doors around 75% of the building. So if you're required to put landscaping there, it makes it kind of hard to use the building the way it's been designed. And the other element to that is they also include that significant overhang on the front elevation where typically that landscaping might have been. So the building's design, it's really just kind of challenging to meet that requirement from the way it's designed. So again, I'm at the thoroughfare overlay district, so it's a relief from that requirement for building-based landscape around the perimeter of the building. Request number 3, parking area paving. Unified Development Ordinance for any non-residential use, which suggests that all off-street parking areas should be constructed of a paved surface, concrete, asphalt or the like. Going back to the site plan, we already talked about it a little bit. As you can see, the site plan, the dark gray area that you see represented on the east and south of the building, which is the primary customer employee parking areas, is all shown as a paved surface. The remainder of the property would be gravel, which is primarily equipment storage. Again, this is fairly typical of a use like this. The more heavily traveled areas, we're working with them to provide paved surface, and then we're keeping the remainder more of a gravel surface area. Variance request number 4 is parking area curbing. This request falls right along with the paving requirement. So again, on non-residential uses, all parking areas are required to be curbed. They have proposed curbing around the perimeter of the paved parking area and then are requesting relief from that requirement around the gravel parking area. These kind of go hand in hand. Gravel surface areas are typically sheet drained into swales at the perimeter, and actually this will all sheet drain towards the front of the property. So those kind of go hand in hand. If the gravel is going to be there, it doesn't make it really, the curbing provides no additional benefit. Building orientation, and this is related to the interstate overlay district. The interstate overlay district requires that proposed structure should have a front-like facade along the interstate frontage. Again, this is a particularly challenging one for a building like this that has a significant service element to the building, which we would prefer to see to the rear of the building away from Indianapolis Avenue, but that's also the interstate frontage. So as you can see from the building elevations we looked at previously, you can see that the southwest and east sides of the building are primarily overhead doors for the service portion of the business. And so we worked with them. I'll go to the elevation facing the interstate, which I keep forgetting is the top one. The first rendition of this had quite a bit less split face block on this elevation, and we worked with them to provide that additional 10 feet across the back here to dress up the back as much as possible. But as you can see, there's only so much you can do when you have a large overhead door for equipment sales and service. So we did work with them to provide a little bit more attractive elevation, but there's limitations what you can do with the service part of the business. So we would clearly prefer the front elevation of the building that you saw along Indianapolis Avenue to remain there, and for the service to be towards the back. So this was the compromise we worked with them to do on that orientation. The next request is a ground sign. Excuse me. The UDO, in terms of ground sign, they're permitted a maximum of 8 feet in height and 32 square feet. The applicant has a corporate pylon sign at their existing facility that they're proposing to move down here. So this is a sign that already exists on the corridor. They're just moving the location. The challenge here for them is that on a new site, they're required to meet all the rules, so it's not just as easy as relocating the sign. They have to meet the new standards regardless of it being an existing sign. So in this case, they're just asking to move in a sign that already exists out there in the corridor to the new location, the new business. This sign is about 25 feet tall, just under and about 100 square feet, so it is larger than that request. The other thing that I pointed out is that this is in an area that permits an off-premise sign, which has much larger size permissions. Not that this is an off-premise sign, but it is an area where something like that's permitted. In this case, like I said, it's just moving an existing sign from one location to another on the same corridor. Number 7 is the corridor buffer. The overlay districts and also commercial streets require a 20-foot corridor buffer along the frontage adjacent to a thoroughfare. And this would apply in this case. Again, like I said, we couldn't have added any more restrictions to the site if we tried. Both the east and north elevations are along commercial streets, which would require a 20-foot corridor buffer with significant plantings in that corridor. In addition, then they would have been required, because it's parking, to have an additional 10-foot parking setback on top of that corridor buffer with additional plantings. So that in essence, they would have had to have a 30-foot setback and then 2 rows of landscaping along the frontage of the streets, which would have equated to about, I believe it's 9 trees and 25 shrubs every 100 linear feet, which would have looked about like a state forest. So we worked with them to come up with a compromise here where they provided the buffer width and then provided the parking lot perimeter landscaping that would be required, as opposed to doing both. So that's what you see represented in this plan, which is probably not shown up. It's shown up okay on the screen. You can see here the buffer width has been provided along the north and east elevations, along with the requirement for 3 trees and 10 shrubs every 100 lineal feet for a parking lot perimeter, which you see represented here along these frontages. So it's a little bit of a hybrid of the requirements that they had, but it was something that, as we worked with them, that's something we felt like would be appropriate. As you can see, there's still a significant amount of landscaping here. I feel like it's going to provide a nice buffer along the street. Variance request number 8 is corridor street trees. This again is a thoroughfare overlay requirement. And this is in addition to the parking lot perimeter landscaping, the corridor landscaping. They're also required to put street trees in the right-of-way. So now we're up to probably about 15 trees every 100 feet that would be required across this frontage if you had the street trees. The challenge with street trees is in the right-of-way out here, there's overhead power lines, so we don't want them to plant trees in the right-of-way, because that's going to cause problems with those overhead power lines before we know it. And then adding that landscaping to their property, again, would have just doubled the amount of landscaping and really wouldn't have provided any additional benefit. It would have just been additional trees. So they're asking for relief from that requirement for the street trees along this frontage. The last but not least is the interstate corridor buffer. This again is very similar to the last 2 we described. Along the interstate corridor, they're required to have a 30-foot buffer width with significant landscape plantings in addition to the perimeter parking lot landscaping requirements, which are shown here. So they would have had to have shown a 40-foot landscape buffer with well over 10 trees per 100 lineal feet and about 30 shrubs. What they've done here again is they've done the buffer width that was required, and then did the parking lot perimeter landscaping planting requirements that you see represented here. Again, a very significant landscape buffer. We've got the width that we need with substantial landscaping along this perimeter. So again, this is a little bit of a hybrid of the 2 requirements that they've shown here. We felt like this was a very good compromise. One other thing to note that's not part of the request, but to their south is an office building. It's the Boone County Economic Development Corporation office. They're directly south of this, so there is a dissimilar land use to their south, and they are providing the required landscape buffer to the south there, which included an opaque wall as well as landscaping. So they have shown meeting that requirement. I've talked to the Boone EDC president a couple of times and showed this to her, and she was happy with what they were providing. So just wanted to point that out, that where we felt like there were dissimilar uses, we wanted to be very careful about that, so we made sure to do that in this case. Those are the 9 requests, and I will double check. I don't believe that there were any conditions I placed on any of them. Staff did recommend approval of the 9 variance requests, and there were no conditions that were imposed. I'm double checking to make sure, but bear with me a second. The staff report's 12 pages long. Correct. Staff recommended approval of the variance requests and with no conditions. So again, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ben, along the 65 frontage, there's a berm here on the landscape plan. Is that for the signage?
That is actually to be able to place equipment for display. So it is outside the buffer width, but directly outside, and then provide a little bit of mound for a display area.
Okay, and I've obviously missed the signage placement then, or sign that they want to?
The sign will be placed near their entrance on Indianapolis Avenue, the proposed entrance. It's the south, it's the south side, it's probably represented by this square on here, is it not?
I think.
Yeah, that sign will be moved to approximately this area on the site plan, just directly south of their entrance.
Okay. On the north side, Ben, is that driveway cut existing, or is that something that they're proposing?
You mean up here towards the the northern end of it?
Yeah.
I believe that's an existing cut, and that would be removed, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That gets removed.
Yeah.
We do have a second cut.
There's a second,
We're proposing there, and it's really, it's not meant for delivery.
You need to step forward to,
Yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we are proposing that second entrance. Can they still see this?
no, it's
Okay.
along that north property.
Along the north property line, the access road to the the interstate, we're proposing a second entrance. It'll be gated. It's really if a large piece comes in of probably used farm equipment, and we need to get it in and out easily. It was meant for a way for the delivery truck, a semi, really, to move in and out without occupying so much of Indianapolis Avenue, tying it up if it were busy or anything.
Are you talking on the road between you and the red machine?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I like the way you refer to that.
Yeah.
But there is an existing cut there, so is that a city street, or is that a county street? Or is that part of the highway?
This is a cut onto the property as it exists now, which will be removed as part of this development.
But it'll be replaced with something else, is what we're saying.
Yes, yeah, it's essentially, yes. That one will be removed. They're requesting one on the north property. Yes.
any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ben. Would you care to elaborate anything else, or?
I guess I just want to make sure I covered that entrance sufficiently, that it's a secondary entrance. It's meant for most likely be locked. And then if that piece of equipment, with today's technology of cell phones, the driver would be able to call in, tell them I'm close. Someone goes out, unlocks it, lets them in, they do the delivery, and they can go back out and lock it up. So that's the intent of that entrance. It's not meant for traffic in and out. It's on the gravel part. We're not looking to make traffic in and out on gravel onto a public street. We primarily want to use the main entrance off Indianapolis Avenue.
Anybody else have anything?
Just to clarify, Ben, or somebody else, there's no fencing here. So when we talk about a locked gate, there's no fencing around the gravel parking?
There will be fencing. We're looking at the front of the building to be more of a split rail, but it's not split rail. They use a steel painted white, so it looks like two 2x6s, 2x8s. Yeah, like a 2-bar fence with the white post. It's all steel. It'll be along Indianapolis Avenue and wrap the corner. And then the rest of the facility is not going to be fenced. It would just be at that entrance. We would put a gate across that. But no, the rest of the property isn't fenced, just along Indianapolis Avenue. And it's just the aesthetics that goes with all their stores that they have. They use the same look, the same style, same signage.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Once again, this is open to the public. If anybody cares to speak, please step forward. Nobody stepping forward, we'll close the public side of this meeting. Do we have any questions for Ben or the applicant? Anybody?
Ben, the sign concerns me. I know it's existing, but we're talking about more than three times the size of what's permitted. I know what we did for the red machine when they redid that or whatever, but it just seems excessive, more than three times the size of the sign. I mean, I can appreciate moving it down the way, but
I may let the applicant address that. That's the request, is essentially to move the existing sign down the road. So
okay.
if they can address it from the corporate perspective, I'd let them do that.
John Deere has a specific sign. That is their sign. That's the size of their sign. If you want to be John Deere, you use their stuff. You pay for everything through John Deere, period. So we're stuck with that sign. That's just the way it works. And unfortunately, we are at your mercy to understand our dilemma and where we're at in the transition from one spot on Indianapolis Avenue to another. And I do appreciate what you're saying. I wish there was a different way, and they do too, because they have to pay for that sign and had to pay for it once, and they don't give a discount.
But so that's the same size as
It's the exact sign. We're moving it from there.
right, but I mean, it would be the same, you're telling me that John Deere has the same size sign for the facility they have up along 31? The new one just south of Kokomo?
I'll let Mitch address that. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm not as familiar with that property.
So the property on 31, there is no sign. There'll be a sign added on the property Fisher, so 126th and 37. This is the exact same sign.
Okay.
The 31 you're referring to is one they've been trying to fight with John Deere on, and they've lost that battle. That's why the sign is now going in. They've been trying.
It doesn't cause us any problem, Ben? Doesn't cause the city any problem in the right-of-way and power lines and all that stuff?
It would not be located within the right-of-way. It would meet the appropriate setback for signage along the road, so it will be located on their property outside the right-of-way, and it would be outside the power lines, which are in the right-of-way.
Okay, thanks.
Where's that sign going to be located again, Ben?
It is just to the south of their entrance, approximately in this area. You
So
see.
those overhead power lines won't be affecting that in any way?
It will not. No, the power lines are on the road side of the
Correct.
right-of-way line, so this
Correct.
is outside of that.
Thank you. Okay, now the next question for the board. Do we want 9 individual votes on this, or do you want to take it as a package, or how do you want to do it?
That with all of them.
I think if we just did a package.
Okay.
Did all
Suits me.
nine variances.
Suits me. Okay, then I would entertain a motion for the 9 variance requests for this particular docket, 18-24.
I'll make a motion that we approve all the development standard variances.
Second. Second.
Horton Perry.
A little disappointed with sign size, but aye.
Bruce Polly.
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger.
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Congratulations. One step down and a bunch more to go. Okay, next item, our last item, is docket 1826. It's a request from Indiana Methodist Children's Home for a variance request. I guess there's 2 of them here. Ben, do you want to start out?
Sure. So this is a repeat applicant from your meeting last month. They received conditional use approval for a group home and educational facility. As we were reviewing that with legal counsel, our definition of group home is very, very specific, and it limits group homes to 8 residents per facility. They are proposing and have been operating for a number of years with facilities that have up to 10 residents. They have a capacity for up to 10 residents. So we felt like just an administrative cleanup. Again, they're not asking for anything that they haven't been doing already on this property. This would allow them to continue to operate facilities with up to 10 residents, and that would include the 2 new facilities they're proposed as part of this development at this time. So that's the first one, is essentially a variance from our definition of group home to allow more than 8 residents, up to a maximum of 10 per facility, and then up to a maximum of 80 residents on the total site, which would be 8 different facilities. The second one is related to fence standards. The way this, I'm sure you're all aware, the way this site is designed, all of their facilities face internal to the property, but their property perimeter is entirely public roads. So all the backyards of these facilities face to the public roads. By definition, our Unified Development Ordinance, that's still considered a front yard, even though effectively it is their backyard. Fence in front yards are limited to 42 inches in height and must be no more than 50% opaque in order for them to provide security and safety and some privacy to these residents. They are requesting taller fence to do a 6-foot tall fence. In the case of the new facility that's on, oops, I got the wrong site. On the south part of the facility, they would do a fully opaque vinyl fence, which is similar to the ones that are already on Essex Street. For the one at the northwest corner, it's a pretty high traffic corner, pretty high visibility corner. Originally, they had shown the building and fence to be perpendicular to the intersection, and there was some concerns about that being that close to the intersection and that visible. And with that fence design. So what we worked with them on, and they actually met with a local resident that had some concerns, they ended up changing how the site was laid out. As you see represented here on the site plan, they've actually turned the building a little bit to move the fence away from the intersection. It's actually further south and away from the intersection, so the building actually faces, the front of it actually faces to the southeast. The fence goes to the southwest away from the intersection. And then they also did, I don't know if this is on or not. We did receive today a design there. They are changing the design of the fence along that intersection to be less than 100% opaque. It's still a vinyl 6-foot fence. but it's a more open design, again, just to make sure we're not creating any sort of visibility issues at the intersection. With the way they've reoriented the building, though, they are significantly away from the intersection. There's not going to be any visibility issues whatsoever for that. So those are the two requests. Pull out my staff report, make sure I haven't missed anything that we might need to cover. Same as the other ones, I will reference that there are findings of fact located within the staff report for the record. In terms of the variance for group home definitions, planning staff has recommended approval of that development standard variance to permit relief from the UDO definition of group home to permit facilities with up to 10 residents. In terms of the fence height and opacity, City 11 planning staff recommends approval of the development standards variance request to permit relief from the fence height and opacity standards of the UDO, subject to the new orientation of the building and fence design that was just presented to staff today. And that condition wasn't in the staff report because that's a little bit of a new change from them, so I just want to make sure that we included that condition to that recommendation. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
There are just 10 now, and they're asking for just really the approval of 2 more, correct?
The facilities, I'll let the applicant speak to the number of facilities they have now. They're adding 2 additional facilities. All of their facilities can house up to 10 residents. So that's the little bit of a hiccup in our definition that allows only up to 8. So
There always has been 10 though, correct?
they always have had, their existing facilities always had the capacity for up to 10 in those facilities. So this is really, in my mind, a little bit of a cleanup just to make sure we have all the appropriate approvals in place for them moving forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Franson. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, let me have one. Color one.
The fence?
Oh, here it
I
is.
said it there.
Still got it. Okay. Good evening. Thank you. My name is Kent Franzen. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Indiana United Methodist Children's Home. Ben has outlined the request. A couple of corrections. We have 4 buildings currently with eight young people per building and 2 family leaders. The 2 new buildings that we proposed, to bring it up to a total of 6 residential structures, would have 10 children residents and 2 family leaders. So it would raise our capacity from 32 currently, 32 students on the campus, to 52 if they're fully occupied. It used to be a dormitory type facility. Now they have individual living units, so they had kind of a change of programming and modeling, but it didn't neatly fit the definition of a group home. Because theoretically, anything more than 8 students, period, would be not a qualifying group home. Well, we've got 32 there now. So we thought the city staff and attorney felt like it'd be better to clean this up and get a variance because of the unique nature of the children's home. So that's the first variance request. It isn't going to change the nature of the campus or the nature of the facilities there. It is going to expand by 2 from 4 to 6 the number of dwelling units. And we'll have one new one built at the northwest corner of Garfield and Camp Street, that intersection. And then the old Asbury Hall, which was the cafeteria, will come down. It's more on the southeast side, actually. It's on the Essex Street side, farther to the east. That will come down and be replaced with a similar structure that looks pretty much like those that are there now. And let me pull up a picture of what these things look like. You've all been by there and seen them. This is one of the structures that's there now, one of the 4, and we'll have 2 more looking somewhat like that. Same style, same color, that sort of thing. When we were here the last time, we were still dickering over the location of the building at the corner, and because of concerns about the fencing that would have gone along behind that facility, when it was proposed to be more square and rectangular to the intersection, that would mean the fencing would be square and rectangular to the parallel to the streets, Garfield and Camp Street. It was felt like if we could turn it so the front of the building faced more northeast rather than due east, it would look better on the property. And then the fencing wouldn't be as close to Camp Street as it is, or as it was proposed. And so we've got a new layout there, and that's how the configuration, and the Plan Commission approved that configuration 2 weeks ago. The fencing we're talking about, which is the subject of the variance on this building, is essentially this here. And it basically is just privacy fencing. So the people driving down the street, primarily Garfield going this way, north, aren't looking into the back end of bedrooms or areas where people are living. And so currently they have fencing along the Essex Street facilities. And that's essentially what is there now behind those four facilities along Essex Drive. Those are 6-foot-high vinyl fences. They're painted kind of a white. They're not pure white, I don't think. Maybe they are. They're cream color, maybe white. They are 100% opaque, meaning you can't see through them at all. And the new building that we propose along Essex Drive, farther to the east, we propose to have the same fencing that is there now. Same color, same size, same style. We felt like if we changed the fencing, materials, color, style, shape, height, whatever, it would look odd. The buildings are essentially the same, and the fencing we thought ought to be similar. So we are asking for a variance for that fencing so it can match up with the others along Essex Drive. The one that would go at the intersection of Camp and Garfield would be a different color. It would be more of a tan color, and it would have 30% opaque. It would be open by 30%. So we're proposing the Regency style of fencing, which is here. It's a vinyl fence. It's a PVC vinyl, roughly 30% open. It would be tan in color to match the accessories, the roof line, and the trim colors on the building. It would be 6 feet, again, instead of the maximum permitted 54 inches height. So we're asking for an 18-inch variance on the height of this structure. Those are the requests, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. We've been before your board last month and the Plan Commission 2 weeks ago, and we have made some adjustments, both in the configuration of the property. We've heard some of the neighbors' complaints about yard maintenance and about drainage, and we are going to commit that we're going to work on those things and do a good job maintaining this property. But we are asking for the variances in the fence, from the fence standards, so that we can have similar fencing along the back end. And I can tell you that they are looking at changing that fencing at some point, but they feel like it ought to be the same until they change it. And if they change it, then they want it to be the same again. They want them all to be the same. And we think that this different style of fencing up at the Garfield intersection corner will be an improvement, and will provide the privacy that those residents need, but perhaps be a little more attractive than what we currently have along Essex Drive. So we have provided notice, and we're back again. This is the last round, hopefully, of requests, and we appreciate your consideration so that we can get started with the project. Be happy to answer any questions. I forgot to tell you who I have with me here this evening. I have Rich Lipinski, who was the executive director of the Children's Home. He's here with us tonight. Aaron Spencer, is the Chief Financial Officer, and Bob Doster is the civil engineer from BSA Life Structures. And Bob has brought with him a sample of this fencing material, which we can show you in case, I know the pictures are a little small. Bob brought this with him, and we can certainly pass it out. Let you, Bob, why don't you come up here, since you're the fencing guy, I know nothing about it. Explain how this will fit together.
I'm Bob Doster with BSA Life Structures. I'm a civil engineer, so I know more about dirt than I do fences, but I'll take Ken's compliment anyway. The two samples you have there are a tan and a clay. The architects, I think, were still matching up exactly what the color scheme on the building was to match the other ones. And we're having to compare that with the fence materials to figure out exactly which one we are looking at. We mentioned the tan, that's the lighter one, but it could be slightly darker as the clay. They're pretty similar. So the intent, I believe, of the material with the spacing is kind of like a board and batten type fence look. Fairly clear, I think, from the pictures there about what it would look like. So if there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer those.
The Regency fencing that, in this handout that we were given, is open, is 30% open, so it's not all snapped together, is that?
That is correct. There's a particular one on that page. Let's see. What's on?
Okay.
Is that the fencing sample that you passed out?
Yes.
Yes.
It's on there.
What's the,
That's a tongue and groove. Does that go vertically?
oh, there it is. Pardon, what was the question?
I think each of those are tongue and groove. And do they go vertically?
They do go vertically.
And the tongue would be sticking out on each individual, correct?
That's the sample that they sent us with that kind of configuration. I would hope that they have something a little differently that
Square edge type thing?
is more of a square edge for this sort of application rather than the full tongue and groove, which would fit for the second piece.
Yeah, that's my guess is that sample is representative of the construction of the fence on Essex, which are vertical panels, but they go together. So yeah, I think that's more just representative of the colors than it is the actual construction material for this fence at the Camp Street intersection.
And while you're there, Ben, so it's a 60-inch, they want to put in a 60-inch tall fence.
It's 6 foot tall, 72 inches.
72, okay. So it's up, then that makes more sense with the 18 inches.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, and actually, just a quick clarification, Ken said 54 inches, it's 42. We permit up to 42 inches in front yard, so it's 42 to 72 in essence, so 3.5 feet to 6 feet is what they're requesting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. This is a public meeting. Anybody care to speak?
I need a step stool. Hi, my name's Jan Menzer. I live at 923 West Essex. I'm right on the corner of Garfield and Essex. I've lived there 45 years. Larry's lived there almost his whole life. I just have some issues with where they're proposing to build the building on Garfield and Camp. They're going to cut down 11 trees. And the drainage issue that we had when they first started doing this, 5 years ago, whenever they tore down the old buildings and redid, and then we were underwater on our street. So I just hope that everybody here has anybody checked into the drainage problems that we might have from both the buildings?
You would probably have to refer that to Ben about the drainage.
Okay, yeah, what about the drainage?
Okay, thank you.
All right. And then the retention pond. Where's the retention pond gonna be?
We'll,
Okay, all right. That's a problem. Another thing too that I don't know if anybody took into consideration is all the children and their families that walk back and forth to school. They walk through there and then they're gonna have a retention pond in that building. I mean, I don't know what they're proposing to do. Are they just gonna put a fence all around there so the kids don't walk through that? And if there is a retention pond, I mean, I don't know. All the kids that walk back and forth to school, a lot of them run through there, through the children's home to go to school. A lot of parents have their golf carts and stuff right there waiting for their children. So that's another issue I have. The main thing is the drainage. It's just, when we were underwater, Susan still has, my neighbor Susan, she was at the last meeting, I couldn't come. She still has her sandbags in her garage because of all the water that came all through her garage, clear through her house. I just really want to know what they figured out on the drainage.
okay,
That's all I gotta say.
thank you.
Thank you.
The 11 trees really bothers me too.
Anybody else care to speak?
Trees might be why there's a drainage problem.
Susan Peterman, I live at 921 West Essex. I was here at the last meeting. There are at least a dozen or more, maybe 20 children that walk through that field and back home every single day. They're going to be walking right past that retention pond and maybe right through it. So I don't know what kind of liability issues might be. I mean, we're going to fence the whole thing. That's really not going to look very good. Essex Street used to be a beautiful street when I moved in 30 years ago. It's not beautiful anymore, except at that west end, and that's beautiful. And we're going to lose that. And I'd just like for somebody, well, I'd like for all of you to go and look at all those trees that have red ribbons around them because they're going to be cut down. And I'd also like an explanation of why they can't use that lot at the east end of their property, where they demolished a building not too long ago. They wouldn't have those liability issues with the children walking back and forth past the retention pond. And it's a perfectly good building site. There are no trees to be cut down. But, you know, we're just longtime neighbors, and it seems like we don't get any consideration for our feelings about any of this. And I'm also a little taken aback from the last meeting when I heard that they have just a few 19-year-olds living at this children's home. Those are adults. What are they doing at the children's home? Are they going to be housed in this house that's yards away from an elementary school? And if not, who's going to enforce that? Anyway, I guess that's all. Jan and I we're just a little peeved about the whole thing. So we'd like for all of you to go out there and see where they're getting ready to put this house. So that's all.
Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Steve Day. I live on 620 Camp Street. The only issue I have with the fences is I thought there was an agreement at the Plan Commission meeting for landscape in front of the fences on the new building at Camp and Garfield. I can't say anything about the ones on Essex, but the one that's going to be the most visible, it did get turned and the color did change, which is great, but I really think it needs some kind of landscape buffer, only because of the golf carts, the kids that walk by. I mean, should there be some more screening there, some type of green space, green screen or something in front of that? Wouldn't be a bad idea to soften the blow of the white fence on Essex to maybe do something there at some time in the future. But definitely the one on the corner of Camp and Garfield should have some kind of green screen. It was talked about at the Plan Commission. Obviously, it's not being mentioned now. This is the last step. So that's my agenda, that's my issue, and I've lived there for 33 years, and they've been good neighbors. They really have. But the public has to stand up and ask for what they think is right.
Thank you. Anybody else care to speak? Seeing nobody stepping forward, we will close the public portion of the meeting. And I got a question for Ben. Is it retention or detention?
In this case, I believe it is, it's a series of green infrastructure, so I don't believe, there isn't water, and it's, unless, right?
Let me explain those a little bit. They are, they're basically shallow depressions that do both retention and detention. Retention means that we put in a layer of permeable soil and plant over the top the first 6 inches or so of rain that falls, which is pretty much your 1 to 2 year storm, and below. 2-year storm means a storm that occurs every 1 or 2 years. Those storms will be retained in the basin and then infiltrate into the ground. We have an under drain underneath that will allow it to, if it doesn't percolate into the surrounding soil, it will run into that under drain and allow the water to go to the storm sewer eventually. But it really drags out the process from basically minutes to several hours for that amount of rainwater to drain in. Yes, sir.
It is not tiled to the storm drain? It just percolates that direction?
No, there will be a tile that runs to the storm drain.
So the maximum amount of water, the maximum depth, basically 6 inches.
What you'll be retaining is 6 inches of water. Anything above that, the maximum depth that the pond will get to is roughly around 12 inches deep in a 100-year storm. A storm that is a design rain event that occurs theoretically once every 100 years. Of course, we've had, 2 or 3 of them in the last 10 years or so, but yeah, that's the nature of the science. So on these larger event storms, we do start to get runoff into the storm sewer. The design of the ponds, though, is that it detains water, slows it down to a rate that is less than the current amount of runoff. So in each of the design storms, the amount of runoff that will occur will be less than what it currently is.
You know the size, excuse me, do you know the size tile that's going to be running to the storm? Is it already through the storm drain?
There is a 6-inch under drain through the pond. It's about a foot below the surface, so the water's got to percolate down to it. And then that tile connects to an outlet structure down at the south end of the basin, and that then has a 12-inch storm sewer running over to the existing tile over at the corner of Essex and Garfield.
Okay, thank you.
Keep all cleaned up all the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question about the amount of water? Did that, on the retention and the detention, about how deep the water was going to be, did that answer your question?
Let me add a little bit of that first. This has already received development plan approval from the Plan Commission. As part of that, they're required to meet all of our stormwater detention, retention, drainage requirements for the city. And as Mr. Doster suggested, they are actually going to improve the ink condition, but our requirement is that there would be no net impact. So basically, if it stayed the same as what it is now, they've met our requirement because it's an infill development, but they're actually going to improve the condition. But they are required to meet all of our drainage requirements for the city of Lebanon as part of this project, and they are, I believe, still going through that process or being close to getting that approved. So once they've done that, they've met our requirements for drainage. But this did go through development plan approved from the Plan Commission last month and get approved. So from the site design perspective, this has been approved. So the two requests tonight that we can consider are based on the definition of group home to allow them to go up to a maximum of 10 residents, and then the fence height. Those are the two elements that we can consider tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Ben?
I did want to also add, we had one of the gentlemen from the public ask about landscaping around that perimeter. That there have been some informal discussions, but nothing's been committed as far as landscaping. If the board thought it was appropriate for there to be some landscaping added around that perimeter of that fence at Garfield and Camp, we can make that one of the conditions of approval, that they work with staff to come up with an appropriate landscape design for that.
I don't know if this is appropriate time, but Mrs. Minter was talking about the detention pond, maybe a fence around that to keep children out. Is that?
It's private property.
Again, I just want to reiterate that the site design has already been approved by the Plan Commission. It might be a stretch to make that a condition for a fence height variance to put a fence, and we do not require that as part of our ordinance.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Bob, maybe you can address what the depths are on any of the existing ones?
It's only, well, it's the one that's on Camps.
Yeah, they can't hear you.
I could shout from the back. The one on Camp Street that we have currently is only 6 inches deep, up to about a foot. The one across from the school gets a little bit deeper. I think that one can go about 3 feet deep. We do not have a fence around that. This one that's proposed, again, 6 to 12 inches deep. It would be a maintenance problem to fence it and then try and maintain around it. We are thinking of some landscaping around it. And we've been talking with Mr. Lipinski about some additional landscaping around the fence for this new structure at Camp and Garfield as well. It's the intent that we put some around it as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ben? Thank you, Ben.
Are there
Anything
questions
for?
answered? Are your questions, did he answer any of your questions? I mean, all your questions, or?
I'd just like to say that at one time.
You
Need to step forward, please.
You need to come up to the microphone, please.
I'm the lady with the sandbags in my garage. I'm afraid to get rid of them, even though they're taking up a lot of space and they're really heavy for me to move, but I've done it several times. And one time, I went to the Stormwater Management Board meeting. They never paid any attention to me at all. Thank goodness the street department did help me somewhat one time. But I took a photograph of myself in the backyard holding a ruler. I had a 7-inch deep lake, my entire backyard. It went across the alley, and the lady behind me had a lake in her backyard. She was 95 years old at the time, I believe. And I mean, this was really serious, and this started as soon as they built those 4 houses. We had some serious problems. And Jan and I are just a little concerned about what we've got facing us now that we've got another house going in there. So that's all.
Anything for the children's home?
I don't know that it's applicable to the variances that are in front of us, but I guess I would like to know, I'm assuming it's an operational thing, why they're not building at the northeast instead of the northwest. But I don't think that has anything to do with the current variances in front of us.
You say go east, like Mrs. Menzer mentioned?
In
That's
looking
fair. It's
at-
fair
in looking at
question.
aerial mapping, I understand, I understand the comment that was made, looking at the aerial mapping and the east end is open and there's not trees there and
That's
stuff. And I've assumed, personally, I've assumed that it's an operational thing, that you don't want to build there and you want to build at the northwest.
Well, I think it's a fair question. The answer is I think they're going to go there too. They can't go there now because there's utility lines and easements through there. City drainage, city infrastructure is in the way, and it would cost a lot of money to move that, and they're not prepared to spend that money today to move those facilities. I think their long-term plan is to move those facilities with the cooperation of the city and put another building down at that end. But it's not a situation where they pick one or the other. I think their long-term plan is to have buildings at both ends. And they felt like we need to start at the west end because we don't have that infrastructure impediment that we're facing at the east end. So I think that is the long-term plan. And as far as the trees are concerned, I think the current count, I'm told, is 7 trees. I haven't verified that, but I trust the people who told me that. You know, and I understand the people who live around there like those trees. It's a pretty area, but you know, it's their property. I mean, it's their property. They could cut them all down and put a softball field out there, or a soccer field, or other playground areas. I mean, there's nothing in that zoning ordinance that says somebody's got to keep trees on their property just so the neighbors can look at them. So, I mean, I'm not playing flippant with that concern, but the fact is the trees are there. They're the children's home's property, the children's home trees, and if they want to take a few of them down to make room for another building, there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that would prohibit the children's home from doing that any more than anybody else knocks down trees to make room for the house on their new lot or a new garage or a new swimming pool in the backyard or whatever we may be talking about. And Mr. Day is correct. We were talking about landscaping around that fence at Garfield. We're still talking about it. I'm frankly embarrassed a little bit that we don't have a better plan and commitment for landscaping other than we are going to put some landscaping around there. But the time with the holiday and other things jumped up on us, we don't have a plan. We don't have a plan we can present. We're happy to work with the city to come up with some materials that will shield that area a bit and block the starkness of that fence. But what exactly it will be, how many trees, where they will be, how tall they will be, I'm not authorized to make any promises. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're here tonight for the 2 variance requests. 1 for the group home definition and 2 for the fence height. I would entertain a motion, please.
I'll make a motion for the approval of the development standard variance from group home to permit facilities with up to 10 residents. Relief from the UDO definition of group home to permit facilities with up to 10 residents.
So we're taking these as 2 separate.
I would.
Okay.
Pretty.
I second that motion.
Okay, and Chad seconded it.
Okay. Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion passed. Okay, now excuse me. The second vote will be for request number 2, fence height. I would like a motion, please.
Make a motion to approve the second variance on the fence height. Variance number 2, based on the revisions that the applicant has made to open that fence up, so it's 30% open, with the condition that we will see some type of landscape plan for outside of those fences.
I would second the motion.
Wait a minute.
Did you want to maybe just suggest that as approved by staff or work with staff? to
As
present
approved by staff,
Okay.
would have, okay.
And I would second that. Approved by the staff.
Ronnie seconded it.
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Good luck. And everything will turn out okay. Do we have any other business tonight?
Make
Okay.
a motion to adjourn?
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is closed. Next meeting is July the 3rd.
No, we got one next week.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We have one next Tuesday night
At 7
at 7 o'clock, right here. Meeting is adjourned.